My eyes snapped open. The air was thick with the cloying scent of old roses and cheap perfume, a familiar, nauseating combination. For a moment I was disoriented, the phantom taste of bitter medicine and the cold press of a tombstone still clinging to my senses. Then the voices filtered in. A proper woman's duty, of course. To serve her husband and his family, to bear children and maintain the household. My blood ran cold. Those words. That voice. Mrs. Sterling's voice, dripping with a condescension she mistook for benevolence. I was standing in the Sterlings' overly ornate parlor. My parents flanked me, their smiles strained, their bodies tense with a familiar mix of hope and humiliation. My mother subtly tugged at the sleeve of my faded, washed-out floral dress, a dress I remembered with painful clarity. My fingertips were like ice. It was this day, this exact moment. In my first life, these words about being a proper woman, coupled with Julian Sterling's charming, gentle facade, had swept me into a dizzying dream. Elara Vance, plain and simple, had thought I was stepping into a life of comfort and love. I never knew it was a gilded cage, a pit of fire that would consume me slowly, until I was nothing but ashes to be swept aside. A memory, sharp as a shard of glass, pierced my mind. Kaelan. My childhood friend Kaelan. Standing alone before my desolate grave, his figure etched with a loneliness so profound it stole the air from my lungs. And then the resolute final act. The muffled gunshot that echoed in the silent cemetery, a brutal period at the end of my tragic story. He had loved me in silence for years. And when I married Julian, he had simply stayed. Waited. And when I was gone, he saw no reason to remain. A hot, sharp pain lanced through my chest, a dense, thorny ache spreading like poison. And then another vision. Julian, my husband, holding his precious Isabel at my sickbed, sneering down at me. You've occupied the Mrs. Sterling title for long enough, Elara. You were always in the way of my true love. His mocking face was a brand on my soul. The hate that surged within me was so violent I thought I might vomit. But I clenched my jaw, forcing it down. I had been given a second chance. A chance to set things right. Julian could have his flawless Isabel. And I would not let Kaelan's devotion end in tragedy again. This time I would choose the man who had chosen me even in death. Fine. I would marry Kaelan. Julian would marry Isabel. Everyone would be happy. I was pulled from my furious thoughts by a sudden commotion outside. A rush of frantic footsteps and ragged, heavy breathing. The half-latched gate to the courtyard slammed open with a bang, silencing all conversation. And there he was. Julian Sterling. He staggered in, clutching the doorframe, drenched in sweat as if he'd run a marathon. His usually immaculate hair was a mess, his expensive suit wrinkled and askew. Every ounce of his carefully cultivated dignity was gone. His head lifted, his panicked eyes scanning the room with a frenzied urgency before locking onto me. The look in them was shockingly complex. Panic, a deep, gut-wrenching guilt, the wild, desperate joy of someone who has found a lost treasure, and beneath it all a reckless, terrifying resolve. My heart gave a violent jolt. This had not happened the first time. Mrs. Sterling froze, then forced a brittle smile. Julian, what is the meaning of this? We are discussing a good date for you and Elara. No. Julian's roar cracked through the parlor, making everyone jump. His chest heaved, his eyes bloodshot as he stared straight at me. This wedding is off. I don't agree. Elara Vance, I can't marry you. The room plunged into a dead silence. My parents' faces went chalk white. Mrs. Sterling gaped, a fish out of water. I looked at him, truly looked at him. At the pain and struggle in his eyes that completely contradicted his cruel words. He looked terrified that if he were a second too late he would be trapped. With me. And then the realization hit me with the force of a lightning strike. An absurd yet crystal clear truth. He had been reborn. He knew that if he married me he would miss his chance with Isabel. He knew she would be married off to that old merchant, would waste away in misery. He had come back to correct his mistake, to kick me, the inconvenient obstacle, to the curb before our lives could be entangled, so he could run to his true love. A cold, bitter laugh threatened to bubble up from my chest. The hatred churned, a living thing inside me. But on my face I slowly let a faint, perfectly calm smile appear. Under his shocked gaze and the stunned silence of the room I spoke, my voice soft but clear. I had wanted to say those very words myself. I began, my tone as casual as a comment on the weather. But out of respect for both families, I hadn't spoken first. I paused, watching Julian's pupils contract sharply. Actually, Kaylin and I have long had feelings for each other. We were only troubled over how to bring it up to you without causing offense. Now that you've spoken first, Julian, that couldn't be better. The color drained from Julian's face as if I'd struck him. He stared at me in utter disbelief. You and Kaylin? No, that's impossible. That's not possible. You were supposed to love me. In our last life you thought of me until the day you died. How could you possibly be with Kaylin? His broken tone, his unfinished words, confirmed everything. I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. What do you mean, Julian? Yes, we've known each other since childhood, but matters of the heart can't be forced. You have someone you love and I also have someone I care for. If we each marry whom we choose without interfering with one another, isn't that best for everyone? No, it's not like this. It wasn't supposed to be like this. His eyes grew unfocused, his voice a dazed murmur. He seemed lost, adrift in a reality he hadn't anticipated. He desperately searched my face for any sign of falsehood. Alaire, listen to me. You can't marry him. Julian, I interrupted, my voice still gentle but layered with an unshakable finality. Congratulations on your freedom. And I also wish you and Isabel a long and happy marriage. The name, Isabel, was like a poisoned needle, piercing straight through his last line of defense. His whole body shook violently, and the way he looked at me was as if he were seeing a ghost. I no longer cared to look at his shattered figure. I turned to my stunned parents and Mrs. Sterling, whose face was dark with suppressed fury, and curtsied lightly. Father, Mother, since everything has been made clear, I'll return to my room. As for the details of breaking the engagement, you can discuss them with Mrs. Sterling. I have no objections. I didn't bother acknowledging the way Julian's eyes burned into my back, nor Mrs. Sterling's shrill, rising accusations. I walked steadily toward the back courtyard, my steps measured and sure. The moment I turned the corner, the calm mask I had forced onto my face melted away, leaving only a barren desert of cold hatred in my eyes. Julian Sterling, I thought, a grim satisfaction settling in my soul. You've come back too. Perfect. The show has only just begun. The chaos from the front hall, Mrs. Sterling's furious shouts, Julian's broken roars, faded into a muffled din as I shut the door of my small, tidy room. I leaned against the cold wooden door, exhaling a long, trembling breath. This wasn't a dream. I had truly been pulled back from the brink, returned to the moment before the tragedy began, before the endless days of being used, drained, and suffocated. Memories surged like a tidal wave of broken glass. The cold eyes by my sickbed. The bitter medicine forced down my throat in my final moments. The muffled gunshot before my lonely grave, and the terrifying final warmth of Kaylin's blood seeping into the earth. Each fragment stabbed at my mind, tearing at my nerves until a violent nausea twisted my stomach. When I closed my eyes, I saw him, Kaylin's figure collapsing in front of my tombstone, a scene so painfully vivid it stole my breath. That fool. The boy who had silently followed me since we were children, who never once went against my word, who treated every casual sentence I spoke as if it were a decree. How blind had I been to trust Julian's false tenderness so completely, while ignoring the steadfast, quiet devotion that had been my constant shadow. I had even ridiculed Kaylin with the cruelest words when he had finally, desperately, mustered the courage to ask me to leave this very town with him. A cold, phantom hand clutched my heart, squeezing until the pain was suffocating. Luckily, this time I still had a chance to make things right. Julian could chase his flawless Isabel all he wanted. My path lay elsewhere. Unlike the chaos in the front hall, the back courtyard was quiet. Only the rustling of the wind through the leaves of the old oak tree broke the stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear but with a desperate, hopeful urgency. I dragged the familiar moss-covered stepping stone to the base of the garden wall, climbed onto it, and raced myself just high enough to peek over the top. On the other side, in the modest yard of the Croft family, he was there. He was crouched on the ground, his broad shoulders hunched in concentration as he carefully loosened the soil around his mother's prized rose bushes. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy of the oak, dappling his straight back and focused profile in shifting patterns of light and shadow. He looked calm, steady, An anchor in the storm of my resurrected life. My throat tightened. I picked up a small pebble and tossed it lightly. It landed with a soft talk at his feet. His hands stilled. He looked up, confusion etching his features. When he saw my head peeking over the wall, he froze for a moment, then immediately stood and walked quickly toward me, his brows knitting with that familiar, deeply ingrained trace of worry. "Alara? What's wrong?" His voice was low, taut with a concern he tried to mask. Was it something with the Sterlings? Of course he knew. He knew the Sterlings had come today to finalize the marriage proposal. He had probably been listening from right here next door, torturing himself with every sound, every indication that I was being lost to him forever, yet not daring to come and ask outright. Seeing the caution and pain in his eyes, my heart ached and softened all at once. "Kaylin," I cut him off, gripping the rough top of the wall with both hands and looking straight at him, my eyes bright with a resolve he had never seen before. "Last time you said you wanted to take me away from here. Does that offer still stand?" Kaylin went rigid as if struck by lightning. His eyes flew wide open, and in their deep, honest depths, I saw my own reflection, clear, unmistakable, and filled with a determination that shocked him to his core. Shock, disbelief, and a flash of sheer panic warred on his face. "Alara, you..." His Adam's apple bobbed, his voice coming out rough and dry. "Do you know what you're saying? Today was supposed to be your wedding day with Julian. It's over." I cut him off cleanly. The corners of my lips lifted uncontrollably, like a child who had finally succeeded in a grand, secret plan. I kicked him to the curb. Well, more accurately, he came running here to break the engagement first, so I just went along with it and rejected him right back. I blinked at him playfully, my tone light, yet carrying a firmness I had never possessed in my previous life. "So, Kaylin, I belong to no one now. I'm still waiting for your answer to what you asked me last time. Should I give you a clear yes or no?" The weight of this impossible turn of events seemed to crash down on him all at once. He just stared at me, staring for what felt like an eternity. The shock and confusion in his eyes slowly, miraculously transformed. It was like watching the sun break through a week of storm clouds. A deep, overflowing joy and excitement surged forth, mixed with a fragile, heartbreaking caution, as though he were afraid a single breath would shatter this beautiful dream. His hands clenched and relaxed at his sides over and over, the veins rising faintly on the backs of his work-roughened hands. He was gathering his courage, summoning every ounce of strength he possessed. At last he took a deep, shuddering breath. Yes. The single word was firm as stone. His calm, gentle eyes, usually so reserved, shone so brightly it was almost blinding. "Alara Vance, I've kept these words in my heart for so many years. As long as you want it, as long as I have it, it's yours." He paused, his voice sinking lower, carrying the weight of an oath that allowed no doubt. "Counts. It will always count." The heavy, cold stone that had been sitting in my chest since I awoke in that parlor finally crashed to the ground, shattering into dust. A wave of warmth surged through me, so potent it swept away every shadow and chill left from my past life. Looking at him, at this good, honest man who loved me more than his own life, I smiled. My eyes curved into genuine crescent moons of happiness. "Good," I said, my voice soft but clear as a bell. "Then Kaylin Croft, come and marry me. The sooner the better." At some point the clamor in the front hall had faded completely. I climbed down from the stepping stone, brushing the dirt from my hands, and turned, only to come face to face with my mother. She stood under the eaves, looking at me with a complicated expression, hesitating to speak. "Alara," she said at last, her voice laced with worry. "Tell me the truth. Is this with Kaylin real, or are you only doing this to spite the Sterlings? Your mother has to know." I walked over and slipped my arm through hers, my tone more earnest than it had ever been. "Mom, you've seen how Kaylin has treated me all these years. So has Dad. I was foolish before, blinded by Julian's shallow charm and fancy words. But now I understand. When it comes to marriage and building a life, sincerity is what matters most. And Kaylin, he truly cares for me. He values me." My mother looked into my clear, steady eyes, searching for any hint of deception. Finding none, she sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of her own regrets. She finally patted the back of my hand gently. "As long as you've thought it through, that's what matters. That boy Kaylin may be quiet, but he's solid and kind-hearted. Far better than that Julian Sterling. looking all proper on the surface, yet acting so shameless, running here at the last minute to break off the marriage. What did they think of our daughter? Some plaything? As my mother was fuming, my father walked in from outside, his face dark with anger. In his hand he held a thick, garish red envelope, stamped with golden lettering. He thrust it toward me. "From the Sterlings," he said stiffly, the anger simmering in his voice. "They claim it's an apology. If you ask me, it's just meant to humiliate us. To show us how high their family stands and how a Vance girl could never measure up." I took the envelope, my fingers steady. I already knew what it contained. I broke the seal and pulled out the card inside. Sure enough, it was an invitation. "Mr. Julian Sterling and Miss Isabel Reed request the pleasure of your company at their engagement banquet. Date, the 8th of next month." So impatient. The card was designed with extreme luxury, every detail screaming of opulence and haste. Their names were embossed in gold, pressed so closely together they seemed to merge. Beneath them was a saccharine line of love poetry. It was nauseating and utterly deliberate. I could already imagine Julian's frantic joy, desperate to cement his true love, and Isabel reveling in the thrill of a public victory, of grinding my name into the dirt. "Fast work," I sneered softly, my eyes cold as they skimmed over the two names. "Looks like true love really is unstoppable." My mother leaned in, took one glance, and spat on the ground in a most unladylike manner. What nonsense. Just now they were here, all false respect. Now they're shouting to the world that he'll marry someone else. Whose face are they trying to slap? "Lara, throw that thing away. We don't need to look at it." Throw it away? Why bother? I tossed the expensive invitation casually onto the stone table beside me, my voice light as though it had nothing to do with me. "They went out of their way to send us their happy news. We ought to give some kind of response, don't you think?" I looked at my parents, a smile curving my lips, though my eyes held an icy glint they had never seen before. "Father, Mother, let's start preparing." "Preparing what?" My father blinked, confused. "Preparing 2 gifts," I said, my voice sweet but my gaze unwavering. "One for Mr. Julian Sterling and Miss Isabel, to congratulate the happy couple. And the other." I paused deliberately, my tone crisp and steady. "For ourselves. Kaylin and I will hold our engagement banquet on the very same day." My parents were stunned, their mouths hanging open. The same day. Right across from them. My mother stammered. "Elara, isn't that a little too much?" I arched a brow. "Why? They can flaunt their day but we can't? Is a good day reserved only for Julian Sterling and Isabel Reed, and not for me and Kaylin?" "That's not what I mean," my mother said quickly, worry etching lines on her face. "I'm afraid it'll look ugly, that people will talk, that you'll be wronged." I slipped my arm through hers, my voice cheerful but unshakable. "Don't worry, Mom. In this life, anyone who dares to wrong me will find they don't get to enjoy themselves either. Happiness is something we make for ourselves, not something to be compared. If Julian Sterling wants to flaunt himself, let him. But I, Elara Vance, am marrying Kaylin Croft, and our engagement banquet won't just be on the same day as theirs. It will be livelier, noisier, and far more joyful. That honor the Vances must win back in full." My father opened his mouth to speak, but only let out a long, weary sigh. His rough, calloused hands rubbed his face. "Fine," he muttered, a spark of defiance finally lighting his own eyes. "My daughter's right. The Sterlings chose to be ruthless. Don't blame us for answering in kind. The same day it is. I'll go speak to Old Man Croft right away." My mother still hesitated, but when her eyes met mine, so calm, so resolute, she swallowed her protests. She only muttered faintly, "What kind of situation is this?" So the matter was decided. The battle lines were drawn. And I, for the first time in either of my lives, was marching toward my future with my eyes wide open, my heart guarded and my target clear. Julian and Isabel wanted a spectacle? They were about to get one. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The small, unassuming Gilded Rose restaurant at the east end of town might not have had the marble columns of the Grand Crest Hotel, where the Sterlings were holding their banquet, but its owner, a stout, cheerful man named Mr. Albright, was thrilled by our proposition. When he heard we were going head-to-head with the Sterlings, he pounded his chest, his eyes gleaming with competitive spirit. "Leave it to me, Miss Vance. I'll make it the liveliest engagement this town has ever seen. We'll show those stuffy high society types what real joy looks like. He gave us a generous discount, seeing it as an investment in a grand spectacle. The Phelps family, Kalen's family, was overjoyed and poured their hearts into the preparations. They were simple, hard-working people who had watched their son pine for me for years, and my sudden turn to him felt like a miracle. Kalen himself was a force of quiet, determined energy. Dark shadows settled under his eyes from lack of sleep, but they couldn't hide the brilliant light shining within them. Whenever he looked at me, there was that same cautious, disbelieving tenderness, as if I were a priceless, fragile treasure that had fallen from the heavens straight into his arms. He handled every detail from the food to the decorations, with a solemn gravity that made my heart ache with a fondness I'd never felt for Julian. Meanwhile, the Sterlings were conspicuously silent. No doubt Julian was too wrapped up in the wild, euphoric bubble of finally securing his true love, Isabel, to pay us any mind. He was likely congratulating himself on his cleverness, believing he had deftly avoided the trap of a miserable marriage and was now soaring toward his destined happiness. Let him revel in his delusion. The 8th of the month arrived with a crisp, clear sky. The Gilded Rose was strung with bright red lanterns and colorful streamers. It wasn't dazzlingly opulent, but it was bursting with a genuine, infectious festivity. The air was thick with the savory smells of roasting meat and fresh bread, and the hall was packed with neighbors, friends, and townsfolk, real people with honest laughter. Across the wide main street, the Grand Crest Hotel loomed, a monument to gaudy excess. Its entrance was a parade of silk gowns, tailored suits, and painted fans. A massive, ostentatious sign stood outside, its golden letters screaming, celebrating the engagement of Mr. Julian Sterling and Miss Isabel Reed. I wore a crimson cheongsam that Kalen's mother had given me. The fabric wasn't the finest silk, but the tailoring was perfect, hugging my curves in a way that was elegant, not provocative. Beside me, Kalen stood straight and tall in a deep blue suit, his usually calm demeanor replaced by a palpable nervous energy. His palm was slick with sweat as he held my hand tightly. "Don't be nervous," I whispered, squeezing his hand back with a small, reassuring smile. "Today is our happy day." He nodded firmly, his ears flushing a brilliant scarlet, though his eyes burned with a fierce, proud light. "Yes," he said, his voice low and sure. "Our happy day." Both banquets began almost simultaneously. The contrast was jarring. At the Gilded Rose, the hall was a cacophony of warm, boisterous noise. Plates were passed, glasses clinked, and laughter erupted in genuine waves. Kalen, though quiet by nature, was pulled into the celebratory drinking by well-meaning uncles and friends, his cheeks flushed crimson, responding to their teasing with a wide, unguarded grin that made my heart swell. Then a commotion stirred at the entrance. The lively chatter quieted as all eyes turned toward the doorway. They had arrived. Julian stood there, framed in the entrance, wearing an exquisitely tailored white suit, his hair slicked back with perfumed oil. On the surface, he was the picture of the perfect gentleman, but his expression was strained, a mask of civility barely containing deep-seated irritation. His eyes kept darting across the street toward his own banquet, as if worried he was missing something more important. Clinging to his arm was Isabel. She was a vision of meticulous, fashionable perfection. Her lace-trimmed dress was the latest style. A string of pearls adorned her neck, and her hair was curled into sophisticated waves. She held her chin high, a proud peacock on display, though her sharp, calculating eyes were busy comparing, assessing, and ultimately dismissing our humble celebration. Trailing behind them were several relatives from the Sterling and Reed families, their faces etched with smug anticipation, clearly here to witness a spectacle of our poverty. "Well, if it isn't little Alara," Isabel cooed, her voice syrupy sweet yet edged with a razor of mockery. She let her gaze sweep over our modest hall, the plain but hearty food, the simple decorations. Her lips curled into an open sneer. "Today is your big day too, I see. But why did you choose such a place? Isn't it a little beneath you?" Julian's brows pinched tighter. His eyes lingered for a heartbeat too long on my crimson cheongsam and on Kalen's protective, possessive grip on my hand. His expression was a muddled mess of irritation, contempt, and something else, something that looked fleetingly, absurdly like regret. He cleared his throat, adopting a tone of condescending superiority. Alara, Kaylin. Congratulations. I didn't expect you two to move so quickly. Isabel and I came to offer a toast. Since we've known each other so long. Kaylin instinctively stepped forward, half shielding me with his body, his face darkening. Thank you, he said, his voice tight. We appreciate the thought. I squeezed his palm lightly, a silent signal to stay calm. Then I picked up 2 cups of wine from the nearest table and walked forward, my face arranged into a perfectly polite, distant smile. Mr. Sterling, Miss Reed, I said, my voice even. Congratulations to you as well. I handed 1 cup to Kaylin, raised my own and looked steadily at the pair. We're truly honored that out of all the splendor of your Red Pavilion banquet across the street, you still took the time to grace our humble little gathering. You've shown us such generosity. My words, pointedly elaborate, hung in the air. Isabel's smile tightened. Julian's face grew more strained. He seemed to be searching my face for any trace of forced cheer or hidden resentment, but he found nothing. I was a placid lake and it was unnerving him. I tilted my head back and drained my cup in one clean, smooth motion, then gave the empty glass a little shake, smiling brightly at them. Kaylin, catching on at once, mirrored my action, draining his own cup without hesitation. A flash of pure irritation flickered in Julian's eyes. Before he could speak, Isabel forced a tinkling laugh and nudged his arm sharply. Julian, look how straightforward Alara is. We should drink too, shouldn't we? Don't waste her kindness. Julian looked as though he'd been pushed onto burning coals. He reluctantly accepted a glass from a hovering waiter, his eyes still fixed on me with that unreadable, turbulent mix of confusion and unrest. Drink, Julian. Isabel's voice sharpened, her smile brittle. What are you waiting for? Don't tell me you can't bear to swallow the wine from Alara's table. The jealousy and spite in her words were thinly veiled. The room fell silent, the air turning thick with tension. Pressed by her goading, Julian finally tipped his head back and downed the wine in one rough, angry gulp. The motion was clumsy, splashing dark liquid onto the pristine front of his expensive white suit. Only then did Isabel hum with satisfaction. She curved her lips into a brittle smile. Well then, Alara, enjoy yourselves. We still have many distinguished guests waiting for us across the street. And you know the Grand Crest isn't cheap. We can't neglect our company, can we? She deliberately emphasized the words, then looped her arm possessively through Julian's and made to leave. Miss Reed, my voice, calm and clear, stopped her in her tracks. She turned back, suspicious and guarded. I kept my smile unchanged and picked up 2 bulging bright red envelopes I had prepared earlier. Today is your engagement, a joyous occasion. This is just a small token from us, a congratulatory gift. My tone was utterly sincere, warm enough to sound genuine. May the 2 of you share deep affection, grow old together and never be parted. The last words almost stuck in my throat, but I delivered them flawlessly. The envelopes were thick and heavy. Isabel's eyes lit up with avaricious satisfaction. She reached out immediately, feigning polite reluctance. Oh, how thoughtful of you. But really, Alara, we couldn't possibly, especially when things aren't easy for your family. Even as she spoke, her fingers pinched the envelopes, testing their weight. Her smile froze. The texture was all wrong. Not the smooth, crisp feel of banknotes, but the rough, bulky feel of stacked paper. She lost all composure, tearing one envelope open on the spot. With a loud rustle, the contents spilled onto the floor. It wasn't money. It was a neat bundle of old, yellowed newspapers, cut into perfect squares. On the top page, 4 bold, ink-brushed characters were scrawled. Scumbag, and a match made in heaven. Isabel's face contorted with rage, twisting into something ugly and unrecognizable. Her hands shook, scattering the paper squares across the ground. She jabbed a sharp, painted fingernail toward my face, her voice rising to a shriek. Alara Vance, what is the meaning of this? Julian's face darkened instantly, veins bulging at his temples. Alara, you've gone too far. I blinked, stepping back slightly to stand more fully behind Kaylin, my voice soft but loud enough to carry. Oh, Miss Reed, you don't like it? But didn't Mr. Julian Sterling once say that what he admired most about you was the literary air you had when you read the newspaper? That the fragrance of ink on the pages made you seem more refined than anyone else? I gave a small, innocent shrug. I went out of my way to find the cleanest newspapers I could, just to match your exquisite tastes. A stunned silence hung for a second and then it broke. A stifled snicker came from the back, then another, until the hall was rippling with muffled laughter. Haha. Newspapers as a gift. How fitting. Exactly. Ink fragrance. So refined. Clever girl Alara. Isabel's face flushed a mottled red, then paled to a sickly white. Her chest heaved with furious, ragged breaths as the mocking laughter crescendoed around her. Julian was shaking with fury, his hand trembling as he pointed at me. You're utterly unreasonable. Isabel, let's go. We won't stoop to their level. He dragged the nearly hysterical Isabel away, her heels catching on the scattered newspapers as they stumbled out of the gilded rows and into the street, pursued by a chorus of laughter and whispered mockery. They looked like two bedraggled fancy-dressed dogs with their tails stepped on, fleeing in utter disgrace. I watched their retreating backs, clapped the non-existent dust from my hands and calmly returned to my seat. Kalen looked at me, his eyes full of astonishment that quickly softened into overwhelming fondness and amusement. He leaned close, his warm breath tickling my ear as he whispered, "You're mischievous." I lifted my teacup, took a deliberate sip and winked at him playfully. That was nothing, Kalen. The real show is yet to come. After our engagement, life seemed to fast forward. Our wedding was a simple, warm affair, held under the blooming branches of the old oak tree in the Croft family courtyard. Its sweet fragrance filled the air, a stark contrast to the stifling perfume of the Sterling's parlor. There were no marble columns or silk gowns, only the heartfelt blessings of the people who truly mattered. Kalen treated me with a clumsy, sincere goodness that was more precious than all of Julian's empty flattery. He didn't speak much, but he remembered everything I liked. He noticed when I shivered in the morning chill and would silently wrap his own coat around my shoulders. He saw me lingering over a bolt of sky blue silk at the market and weeks later, presented me with a scarf made from the same fabric, his ears turning red as he mumbled, "It reminded me of your eyes." It was in the quiet moments, in these small, unspoken gestures, that the last of the icy shards from my past life finally melted away. One evening as we sat by the hearth, the idea came to me. "Kalen," I began, "I've been thinking. The income from the farm is steady, but it's limited. What if we tried our hand at a small business? I have some ideas for snacks and preserves. Things we could sell." I expected hesitation, doubt. Instead, he looked at me with unwavering faith. "What do you need me to do?" The next day he handed me a small worn leather pouch. It was heavy, filled with all his savings, every coin he had painstakingly set aside for years. "It's not much," he said, his voice firm. "But it's a start. I'll go to my uncles, see if they can lend us a little more." My eyes stung. In my past life I had racked my brain, schemed and planned for the Sterling family's business, and all the credit, all the profit had gone to Julian. I never earned a kind word, only more demands. Yet here, after one casual remark, Kalen was wagering his entire world on me. We found a tiny, dusty shop at the town's entrance. It was nothing special, but it had a good window and a sturdy door. Together we scrubbed the floors until they shone, whitewashed the walls and built simple shelves. Drawing on the scraps of knowledge I had accumulated in my previous life, recipes I had perfected, supply chains I had overheard, we began. I made spiced candied meats, tangy pickled vegetables and sweet bean curd cakes. My prices were fair, my smile genuine, and my products reliable. Kalen handled the heavy lifting, the early morning trips to the market for supplies and the deliveries. He worked tirelessly, his quiet strength a constant, reassuring presence. Our lives became a whirlwind of early mornings and late nights, our hands perpetually stained with spice or dough. And strangely, luck seemed to follow us. It was more than luck, I realized. It was as if the universe itself was tilting in our favor. Dried goods I'd worried would sit on the shelves were bought out in bulk by passing merchants the day they arrived. The recipes I experimented with always seemed to turn out better than anyone else's, attracting a loyal stream of returning customers. When Kalen traveled to the next county for supplies, he would somehow stumble upon a farmer selling his prime stock at a bargain, or a merchant would warn him away from a deal that would have been a dead loss. Within 6 months, we had not only repaid all our debts but had saved enough to purchase the adjoining storefront. We knocked down the wall, creating a wide, spacious store that buzzed with activity. Neighbors and townsfolk who came to shop would clap Kalen on the back. The Croft boy found a treasure in you, Alara. His fortunes are clearly rising. Kalen would just grin, that unguarded, foolishly proud grin, his eyes shining every time he looked at me. Meanwhile, whispers about the Sterlings painted a very different picture. Julian's marriage to Isabel was nothing like the dream he had sold himself. Isabel, raised as a pampered young lady, had a taste for luxury that far exceeded her dowry. She demanded the latest fashions from the capital, expensive imported cosmetics, and hired rickshaws for even the shortest errands. She constantly hosted lavish tea parties and salons, flaunting her status as Mrs. Sterling to anyone who would listen. Julian, reborn and convinced that casting me aside was the key to his success, had forgotten one crucial detail. In our past life, most of the business ideas that built his wealth, the clever strategies that saved him from ruin, had come from me fretting and planning behind the scenes. Now, all he had was his own arrogance and a wife who saw him as a bottomless purse. He chased grand get-rich-quick schemes, investing in dubious ventures that collapsed one after another. Together, they were a perfect storm of incompetence and extravagance, burning through the Sterling family's resources at an alarming rate. Their conflicts were no longer private. Shouting matches could be heard from their house near the Grand Crest. From time to time I would pass Isabel at the market. She still dressed herself in the latest finery, a bright, polished peacock, but the sharpness and bitter jealousy in her eyes had only grown heavier. When she saw the steady stream of customers flowing in and out of my shop, she would deliberately raise her voice, criticizing my goods as cheap and unpresentable, while simultaneously complaining to her hangers-on that the food at the Grand Crest was dreadfully bland these days. The laughter of her companions in response was growing more and more forced. Another half-year passed. Our savings grew from a small pouch to a sturdy lockbox. I knew that dabbling in a small shop couldn't last forever. The market was too small. I needed to think bigger. I recalled the trends that had become popular in my previous life, packaged, ready-to-eat foods that could be shipped. I sat Kalen down one night, laying out a plan that must have sounded far-fetched. A small food factory. He listened in silence, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, he didn't scoff or question. He simply asked, "What do you need me to do?" With those 4 words, my world, which had once been so small and confined, expanded into a universe of possibility. We were in this together. Truly, completely together. Securing land, handling permits, ordering equipment, each step was a mountain of tedious, overwhelming work. Yet that strange, benevolent luck held. When we were cornered by a greedy official, a customer whose business I had saved with a timely loan would unexpectedly have a connection and intervene. When we needed a specific piece of equipment, a policy would shift, making it easier to import. The most incredible stroke of fortune came when the owner of a small, defunct factory on the edge of town grew desperate to sell and move away. We bought it for a shockingly low price. Our little food factory, which we named Vance and Croft Provisions, truly came to life. The snacks we produced, with their unique flavors and clean, striking packaging, were a novelty. Before long, they were being sold in general stores across several nearby counties. Kalen managed the production line and outside sales with a quiet, firm competence, while I kept the accounts and developed new recipes. Life was exhausting, our hands perpetually busy, but watching the factory gradually hum with activity filled me with a sense of steadiness and accomplishment I had never known. We bought a spacious, sunlit house in a better part of the city and brought both our parents to live with us. The first real piece of jewelry Kalen bought me wasn't a diamond or a string of pearls, but a heavy, silver Parker fountain pen. "For your accounts," he said, his eyes bright with understanding and pride as he placed it in my hand. "You have so many brilliant ideas. You shouldn't have to stop to sharpen a nib." I knew what it was. It was his way of telling me he saw my effort, he valued my mind, and he was investing in my dreams. It was worth more than every piece of jewelry Julian had ever given me in my first life, because it was given with love and respect, not as a payment for services rendered. Meanwhile, the Sterling family's decline was the talk of the town. Julian's failed investments had drained their remaining resources. The house near the Grand Crest was sold. Rumor had it they had been forced to move into a dirty, cramped tenement in the southern quarter of the city, a place where the air was thick with the smell of the tanneries and the canals. The former white moonlight, Isabel, had been ground down by poverty and bitterness into a nagging, penny-pinching wife, her elegance a distant memory, her daily litany a complaint about her husband's incompetence. The contrast between our lives couldn't have been starker. We were rising, building something real from the ground up. They were falling, trapped in a hell of their own making. And I felt no pity. Only a cold, quiet satisfaction. This was merely the intermission. The final act was still to come. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and ripe apples, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of industry that now surrounded our factory. Vance and Croft Provisions had doubled in size, its brick walls now housing 2 additional production lines. The rumble of machinery was the sound of our success, a symphony I conducted with my ledgers and recipes, while Kalen was its steady, reliable foreman. We had just sent off the last delivery truck of the day. The workers had filed out, their cheerful goodbyes echoing in the yard. Inside the office, the warm glow of a lantern illuminated Kalen as he bent over the final batch of orders, his brow furrowed in concentration. I poured him a cup of hot tea, the simple domesticity of the moment a balm to my soul. The peace was shattered by a frantic commotion at the factory gates. "Let me in. I must see Alara." "Alara." The voice was hoarse, ragged, stripped of all its former cultured elegance. It was a voice from a nightmare. Kalen's head snapped up, his brows knitting instantly. He stood at once, his large frame positioning itself protectively between me and the door. "Stay here," he said, his voice low and hard. I placed a hand on his arm. "It's all right." I walked to the window, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. There at the iron gates was Julian Sterling. Or what was left of him. His suit was a wrinkled, stained mess, his hair a greasy tangle. His eyes were sunken pools of desperation in a pale, gaunt face. He clawed at the bars like a trapped animal, while Old Chin, our steadfast gatekeeper, held him back with firm, disgusted ease. "Alara, I know you're in there. Come out. Listen to me. I was wrong. I was so wrong," he shouted, his voice cracking. "In our past life I was a bastard. I treated you horribly. I shouldn't have done that to you. Please forgive me. Just give me one more chance, won't you?" So he had finally torn off the last shred of pretense. He was laying his rotten soul bare, begging for salvation from the very person he had discarded. I pushed open the office door and stepped outside into the cool evening air. Kalen stayed close at my side, his eyes fixed on Julian with a wary, protective glare. When Julian saw me, a desperate, wild light ignited in his eyes. He struggled harder against Old Chen's grip. "Alara. Alara, you're finally willing to see me. Listen to me," he babbled, words tumbling out in a tangled, pathetic mess. "It was Isabel, that wretched woman. She deceived me. She never loved me. All she cared about was my money. Now that I'm broke, she's run back to her old lover. She wants to divorce me." He wept, real tears cutting through the grime on his cheeks. "Alara, I regret it. I regret it so much. You were the only one who treated me well. My success in our past life was all because of you. I know that now, I know everything. Please let's start over. I swear this time I'll be good to only you. We'll live like before. No, even richer than before. Alara, help me. Just help me one more time." I stood a few steps away, watching him dispassionately. The once proud Julian Sterling was now a broken, weeping shell, groveling in the dirt. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice even without a single ripple of emotion. "You've had too much to drink." He froze, stunned by my calm dismissal. He shook his head frantically. "No, I'm not drunk. I'm completely sober. Alara, I know you came back to. You must remember our past life. Otherwise, you wouldn't have married him." He jabbed a trembling finger at Kalen. "You wouldn't be living this well. Help me. Only you can help me." So he admitted it. He finally acknowledged the shared nightmare that was our first life. I looked at him and a profound sense of absurdity washed over me. This was the man for whom I had wasted my first life. This sniveling, pathetic creature. "Mr. Sterling," I replied lightly, injecting just the right amount of puzzled innocence into my tone. "I don't understand what you're talking about. Past life? This life? Whatever is between you and your wife is your family matter. It has nothing to do with me." I let out a quiet, dismissive laugh and slipped my arm through Kalen's. "As for how I live, you needn't trouble yourself. Because standing beside him I am Mrs. Croft now. My husband is Kalen Croft. I will only ever help him. Isn't that right, Kalen? Kalen wrapped his arm around my shoulders, his gaze on Julian cold and oppressive. Mr. Sterling, he said, his voice low and sharp as shattering ice. Mind yourself. Don't harass my wife. No. It's not like that. Julian had completely lost control. He pointed a shaking finger at Kalen, his voice rising to a wild shout. What are you so proud of, Kalen? You only picked up what I threw away. Elara Vance was my wife in our past life. She loved me. She loved me until the day she died. His words hung in the air, a vile poison. Kalen's fist clenched so tightly the knuckles cracked, his face dark as a thunderhead. He stepped forward, his presence so menacing that Julian choked on the rest of his rant. Julian, Kalen said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that carried more threat than a scream. In our past life, the grass on my wife's grave was 3 feet high, and it was you who buried her there. The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. He went rigid, the madness and desperation on his face shattering into sheer, unadulterated terror and disbelief. His eyes darted from my calm face to Kalen's furious one, his lips trembling but no sound came out. Only then did he realize the full, horrifying truth. I had always known. I had been reborn, yes, but I had not come back to him. I had come back to watch. I had seen his smugness, his eagerness to cast me aside, his so-called true love spiral with him into ruin. I had watched him take a winning hand, a second chance, and grind it into dust step by step until he crashed headlong into the dirt. And all I had done was watch from afar. And when he stumbled toward the abyss, I had given him the gentlest of pushes. True revenge isn't killing a man. It's making him watch the person he abandoned shine brilliantly in the wealth and happiness he cared for most, while he himself wallows in regret and poverty, trapped with no way out. Julian seemed to lose every bone in his body. He collapsed like a rag doll hanging limply in old Chen's grasp, his eyes vacant. A broken, hollow whisper was the only sound he could make, repeating the same words over and over. He knew. He knew. So you always knew. I didn't spare him another glance. With my hand securely in Kalen's, I turned and walked back toward the warm-lit office, toward our future. Behind us, only the hopeless, bestial cries of a trapped and broken man remained, carried off by the bleak autumn wind and scattered into the twilight. It's cold, Kalen said, his voice returning to its normal steady tone as he gripped my hand tightly. Let's go home. I leaned against him, my heart calm and filled with a profound, quiet warmth. The setting sun stretched our shadows long, weaving them together on the path before us until they were one inseparable entity. In this life we were destined for one another. Time was quiet. The days were good. After Julian's crazed scene at the factory gates, he vanished completely from public sight. The world, it seemed, had finally swallowed him whole. Whispers replaced shouts. He became a ghost story told in the poorer quarters of the city. Some said he'd lost his mind completely, wandering endlessly near the foul, stagnant canals of the South Side, muttering my name and babbling about regrets from a past life. Others claimed Isabel had finally managed to scavenge whatever pitiful valuables remained, fleeing with an old lover, a man said to have a little money but a violent temper, and that before leaving she had subjected Julian to a final, brutal beating and a torrent of curses that echoed through the tenement alleyways. Either way, the pair who had once flaunted their true love under golden embossed invitations had rotted away faster and more disgracefully than anyone could have imagined. Another half-year slipped by, marked by the turning of the seasons and the steady, satisfying growth of our business. Vance and Croft Provisions was now one of the largest taxpayers in the region. The county magistrate himself had come to tour the factory, treating us with a respect that was both novel and deeply satisfying. Life was prosperous, steady, and filled with a quiet, profound joy I had never dared to dream of. Kalen treated me as tenderly as when we first married, perhaps even better. A deep, unspoken understanding had settled between us. We never mentioned Julian or Isabel again. They were nothing more than rancid refuse, tossed into the garbage heap of history, and we had no desire to sift through the rot. Until one sweltering, oppressive summer night. A frantic, panicked pounding on our front gate shattered the household's peace. I bolted upright in bed, my heart leaping into my throat. Kalen was already on his feet, pulling on a robe. Downstairs we heard old Chin, our steward, grumbling as he threw on his coat and went to answer. The voice that floated back to us was trembling with panic. "Mr. Croft. Mrs. Croft. My apologies. Forgive the intrusion, but there's been a terrible incident." Kaylin and I exchanged a glance before hurrying downstairs. At the gate stood the headman from the Southern District, his face pale and slick with sweat in the lantern light. "What is it?" Kaylin asked, his voice carrying a trace of impatience and disgust. He made no effort to hide it. "Ah, sir, ma'am. It's Julian Sterling and his wife, Isabel Miller. They're dead. Both of them. Found in an abandoned cesspit in the south of the city." My heart jolted, not with grief but with a cold, grim finality. "How?" Kaylin's voice was flat. The headman slapped his thigh, his face a mask of revulsion. "Wicked. Truly wicked. That cesspit hasn't been used in years. No one ever goes near it. This afternoon a boy's ball fell in, and when he climbed down to fetch it, he found legs. 2 human legs. Nearly scared the poor lad to death." He wiped his brow with a shaking hand. "The patrol officers were called. Took tremendous effort to haul the bodies out. They were unrecognizable. Bloated and decayed. If not for a stack of Julian's old IOUs and a broken bracelet of Isabel's found in a nearby shack, they wouldn't have been identified at all." He paused, gathering his breath, his story spilling out in a horrified rush. "The officers guessed. They guessed the 2 of them had another violent quarrel in the night. Must have been stumbling around in the dark, drunk or mad, and somehow both fell in. The pit's mouth is narrow, the inside slick and deep, the stench unbearable. There was no way to climb out. They drowned. Drowned alive in that filth." The image he painted was grotesque, vivid, and fitting beyond my darkest imaginings. I could almost see it. The endless darkness, the foul, thick sludge forcing its way into noses, mouths, ears. The panic of suffocation, the frantic, useless struggle, the slow, terrifying descent into despair until breath finally ceased. And even in death, the body swelling, rotting, merging completely with the filth that had defined their end. "By now," the headman whispered, "the corpses can't even be looked at. The stench carries for streets around. The patrol said their manner of death was too foul. They'll be sent straight to the paupers' graveyard outside the city to be buried. No service, nothing." He stopped, his words trailing off, but his meaning was clear. Julian had no family left. The only people he had ever desperately clung to, even in his madness, were us. And so, in a final absurd twist, we were expected to deal with the mess. A wave of nausea surged up my throat, so potent I had to clamp my jaw shut. Drowned in a cesspit. Soaked in human waste until the flesh sloughed away. A death so grotesque, so utterly devoid of dignity, it was a parody of an ending. It was the death they deserved. Kaylin's face was ashen. He squeezed my hand hard, his voice cold and final as he addressed the headman. "We have nothing to do with Julian Sterling anymore. His remains. Handle them as an unclaimed body." Yes, of course, sir," the headman stammered with palpable relief, nodding so vigorously I thought his head might tumble off. "We'll take care of it right away." "Right away. Wretched business. Forgive me for disturbing you, Mr. and Mrs. Croft. So sorry. So sorry." He all but fled into the night as though pardoned from a heavy sentence. The heavy iron gates clanged shut behind him, shutting out not only the faint imagined stench that seemed to linger in the humid air, but also the last frayed thread tying us to Julian Sterling and Isabel Miller. Kaylin turned, pulling me tightly into his arms. His large, warm hand stroked gentle, soothing circles across my back as he whispered into my hair, "It's over, Alara. It's all over now." I buried my face against his warm, solid chest, inhaling the familiar clean scent of soap and him. It wrapped around me, steady and safe, washing away the sickening, brutal images crowding my mind. Yes, it was over. Ended in a way far more brutal, filthy, and degrading than anything I could have conceived as revenge. The dignity, the glory, the so-called love they had pursued all their lives had finally been buried in the foulest, ugliest, most disgraceful place possible, with the cruelest irony. If there was ever a phrase to die without a good end, this was it. A death in utter disgrace, stinking for eternity, with no one to claim their corpses, cast into a mass grave, left for the elements to erase. Truly, a death without a whole body, a final scattering into worthless dust. Perhaps even heaven itself had found them unbearable and had reached down to grant that scum of a man and that wretched woman the ending they so richly deserved. I lifted my head, meeting Kalen's worried, gentle gaze. Slowly I shook my head and gave him a smile, a true, unburdened smile of release and peace. "It's over, Kalen," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Tomorrow I want to eat your noodles. The simple kind with 2 fried eggs." He smiled back, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Anything for you." And in that moment, surrounded by the safety of our home and the love of my husband, the last ghost of my past was finally, irrevocably laid to rest. The news of Julian and Isabel's end spread through the city like a foul odor, which in a literal sense it had. The story was too grotesque not to become legend. In taverns and market squares, people whispered about the proud sterling heir and his fashionable wife, who had come to such an ignoble end. They were a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that fortune's wheel could turn with brutal, grinding finality. For me, the days that followed were marked by a profound and quiet sense of closure. A weight I had carried for 2 lifetimes had finally been lifted. There were no more ghosts at the periphery of my vision, no more echoes of a bitter past. The world felt lighter, the colors brighter. Kalen, perceptive as always, seemed to understand the shift within me. He didn't speak of it, but his actions were more tender, his presence more solid. He began to involve me even more deeply in the business, not just as the bookkeeper and idea woman, but as a true partner. We would sit in our office long after the workers had left, the ledgers spread before us, discussing expansion, new markets, and the future of our growing empire. It was during one of these late-night sessions that a new idea, born from the ashes of the old life, took root in my mind. "The capital," I said, tracing a route on a map with my finger. "Our goods are popular in the counties, but the real market, the one with endless appetite and deep pockets, is there." Kalen looked at the map, then at me. "It's a big risk. The competition will be fierce. The distributors there, they can be sharks." "I know," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "But I remember things, Kalen. From before. I remember which distributors are honest, which trade routes are most reliable, which flavors the nobility are starting to favor. We wouldn't be going in blind." He was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady. He was weighing the risk not against the potential profit, but against the potential for my disappointment. Finally he nodded. "Then we go to the capital." The preparations were immense. It wasn't just about producing more. It was about packaging, marketing, and establishing a reputation. We designed new, elegant labels for our jars and tins, using my name, Elara's Pantry, as a brand. It felt empowering to put my own name on the products of my own mind and labor. We rented a small, smart storefront in a respectable but not exorbitant district of the capital, and I traveled there with Kalen for the first shipment. The city was a roaring, chaotic beast compared to our quiet town. But I felt no fear, only a thrilling sense of possibility. Our opening was a calculated affair. I used the small bits of social knowledge from my past life, which charities the influential ladies supported, which newspapers they read, to place our products strategically. I donated generously to a children's hospital, ensuring our name was mentioned in the society pages alongside the donation. It worked. The novelty of our flavors, combined with the compelling story of a husband and wife team from the country making good, captured the city's imagination. Elara's Pantry became a modest sensation. Orders flooded in not just from individual households, but from hotels and finer grocers. We were in the capital, overseeing a large new order when I saw her. Isabel. Or rather, a hollowed-out specter of the woman she had once been. She was leaving a dingy boarding house, her shoulders hunched against the chill. The fashionable dresses were gone, replaced by a worn, faded coat. Her face, once meticulously painted, was bare and lined with hardship. She clutched the arm of a coarse-looking man with a florid face and a mean glint in his eye, the old lover with the violent temper. He shook her arm roughly, barking something I couldn't hear, and she flinched, a gesture of such ingrained submission it was painful to watch. She happened to look up, and her eyes met mine across the bustling street. For a frozen second, there was no recognition, only the blank stare of a beaten animal. Then realization dawned. I saw the shock, the shame, and then a surge of pure, undiluted hatred that contorted her features. She looked from my fine woolen coat to the full basket of groceries my driver was loading into our motor car, then back to my face. I saw the entire miserable history of her life since leaving Julian flash in her eyes. The abuse, the poverty, the slow, grinding humiliation. I didn't smile. I didn't sneer. I simply held her gaze, my own expression calm and unreadable. I offered her no pity, no gloating, no acknowledgement of our shared, terrible past. To me, in that moment, she was simply a stranger on a crowded street. That utter indifference was the final, crushing blow. Her face crumpled. The hatred was extinguished, replaced by a devastation so complete it was almost beautiful in its tragedy. Her companion yanked on her arm, snarling, and she stumbled after him, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. That was the last time I ever saw her. I heard later, through the relentless gossip mill that connected city and town, that the man had been arrested for a petty crime and she had been left with nothing. She vanished, likely ending up in a workhouse or on the streets, her fate as anonymous and meaningless as her life had become. It was a different kind of death, slower than Julian's but no less final. Turning away from the spot where she had stood, I felt nothing. No triumph, no sorrow. It was simply the closing of a book I had already finished reading. I slipped my arm through Kalen's, who had been waiting patiently by the motor car. "Ready to go home?" he asked, his voice a quiet anchor. "Yes," I said, and I meant it in every sense of the word. "Let's go home." Years folded into one another, not with the frantic pace of our early struggle, but with the steady, satisfying rhythm of a life well lived. Alara's Pantry grew from a modest sensation into a household name. We built a proper factory on the outskirts of the capital, one with large, airy windows for the workers and the latest machinery. We became known not just for our products, but for our fair treatment of employees, a principle Kalen insisted upon. The wealth we accumulated was substantial, but it was not the heart of our happiness. The heart of our happiness was the old oak tree in the courtyard of the country house we kept, the one where our children played. A son and a daughter, with Kalen's quiet eyes and my stubborn spirit. They grew up knowing nothing of the shadows that had once haunted their mother, only the unwavering love of their parents and the security of a home built on respect and partnership. I taught my daughter to read the ledgers, to understand the flow of commerce and the power of her own mind. My son followed Kalen through the factories, learning the value of hard work and the importance of looking a man in the eye when you shook his hand. We were raising them not for a life of idle luxury but for a life of purpose. One golden autumn afternoon, much like the one when I had thrown a pebble at Kalen's feet over the garden wall, I found him in our country courtyard. He was teaching our daughter how to carefully prune the rose bushes, his large, capable hands guiding her small ones. The scene was so peaceful, so perfectly ordinary, and yet it struck me with the force of a revelation. This was the victory. Not the ruin of Julian and Isabel, but the creation of this safety, this love, this legacy. Kalen looked up and saw me watching, a slow, warm smile spreading across his face. It was the same smile he had given me when I had agreed to marry him, only now it was deepened by years of shared joy and quiet understanding. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, we sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the stars emerge in the vast, dark sky. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly, his voice barely a murmur in the stillness. "The past? Them?" I leaned my head against his shoulder, considering the question. The memories were there, but they were like old scars. Faded, no longer painful, just part of the map of my life. "I think," I said slowly, "that they were a sickness. A fever dream from which we both woke up. You were the cure, Kalen. This life, our children, all of it, is the health that came after." He didn't reply, simply tightened his arm around me. He understood. We had never needed many words. I thought of the frantic, desperate girl I had been in my first life, so eager for approval and so blind to genuine love. I thought of the vengeful, hardened woman I had been at the start of my second, so focused on balancing the scales of justice. And I thought of the woman I was now, a wife, a mother, a business owner, a person who had been forged in fire but had chosen to build with stone and mortar, not with ashes. The story of Julian and Isabel was a closed chapter, a grim folktale told to warn against vanity and cruelty. Our story, mine and Kalen's, was still being written, its pages filled with the quiet, enduring prose of daily life, of shared laughter, of challenges met together, of a love that had been tested by death itself and had emerged stronger. The world was quiet. The days were good. The people and things that no longer mattered were nothing but dust, ground so thoroughly beneath our feet that even the wind could no longer find them to scatter. Under the canopy of a million indifferent stars, in the circle of my husband's arms, I had finally found not just revenge, not just safety, but a peace so profound it felt like the truest form of triumph. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was the destiny I had been reborn to claim. The end.